and speech language, OTs and a lot of special ed teachers. When we got to this chapter, there was a lot of discussion about why does it feel like what we're doing now is wrong? And where's the research to show that what we're doing now is wrong? And people were feeling, there was some tension in the group, and everyone's for it. So then I got to thinking as we move forward with this book, all the next chapters are about what does this look like, and diving into therapy and school-based, education-based activities. But as we do that, we do want to take pause this week and talk about a little bit about what if you come up with all these great ideas, and I'm realizing that you can't see captioning unless I'm actually on a play from start. So let me see if I can do this for you guys. What if when we get back with all of our great ideas and you find resistance? What if as a special ed teacher, your SLP says, but I already have everything for letter of the week and that's what I'm doing, the end? Or what if your SLP comes in and says, I have all these great ideas, and the special ed teacher says, yeah, you're not the teacher and I have my way of doing things. So if we saw concerns about this amongst the kind of that first early adopter in January with these 1,000 or so people that were super excited, then I'm thinking that we are going to come across some implementation barriers of some of these new ideas with those that are less excited or haven't even heard of it. Or what we're going to do is we're going to kind of dive through a little bit. We're going to talk about pros and cons and what Karen and David highlight. And then we're going to do some smaller breakout rooms so that you guys have an opportunity to talk about kind of the temperature in your school, in your location, in your situation. So we can feel like what is an appropriate amount to even bite off year one or month one or conversation one, depending on where your stress may lie as we move forward on this. So that's kind of what we're looking at today. But this one was on kind of defining what is comprehensive literacy instruction. And being someone who worked in the schools for a long time, and now I don't work directly in schools, schools often have a lot of acronyms and vocabulary. So if you come up and say, well, I'm hoping to do comprehensive literacy for all, that sounds amazing. I love the vocabulary. And it also means not a lot to very many people. I mean, you can imagine that it means literacy for all and who's going to be against it. But when that requires changing the game on someone, we might see some resistance. So if that did not, I forwarded. If that was nowhere in your space while you were reading this book this week, I understand that this is coming out of left field. So that's why I kind of give that little intro on this is what was coming out of the other one. And I thought, man, maybe we should just address this head on. And then as we get into the next few weeks, and it's all about ideas, and we all get back excited again, I think we should keep it in the back of our mind of not necessarily naysayers, because that sounds negative, but just people who aren't always jumping on board for change. And that might be you. I mean, you might be like, I'm feeling like I don't even know how to start this. So we'll just weed through it this week and hopefully come to some just moments of, whatever amount you can bite off is really okay. So let's take a look. So they talk about the whole to part model of silent reading comprehension, and they have this they have a diagram here that kind of shows all of the pieces that are coming: word ID, whole text, print processing, and language comprehension, kind of all happening at the same time. So this was a model long prior to this book that they are explaining is that is something that they're adopting within this. And by the way, some of this chapter is just giving credit to those who have done hard work in the years past and have come up with really good models. This was one of those things from my other book club that she just had a graphic here about self-directed reading and knowledge of words and word study and writing and reading comprehension, and how it kind of all goes on all the time, and it's all simultaneously. Notice there's not a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and 5 here. There's not an order. So it's important to kind of think through that. So this is what landed for me, and I'm wondering if we can have discussion via maybe chat, unless you're feeling brave to speak up. On one hand, it said word identification is the cognitive process of making print to sound links in order to translate printed word into their speech equivalent. And then she goes in, I keep saying she as if Karen's the only author here, and I'm sorry. They go into saying why this is hard for kids with complicated bodies, in particular nonverbal children. Why beginning readers may struggle in comprehending text. They are devoting extensive cognitive resources to meditating nearly every word they encounter. So word identification, when you have all these words around it that you know, and all you're focusing on is, I'm going to take all the words around it that I know and try to figure out the word I don't know. That's how a lot of our kids get really quickly in the reading process. But if our kids are needing to use word identification strategies for every single word in the sentence, then there's so much cognitive resources being used there. And it's just, there's an acknowledgement of why this is hard for our kids. And until they build up some word ID skills, every word is hard. So I think they just give a explanation about why word ID is not quite as easy for our kids, that literacy does not come quickly, and that may be due to having a seizure during instruction. They may have low vision, they may have med issues, they may have all kinds of things, resources that prevent them from learning common words quickly. Did this strike a chord with anyone while reading today or this week?
I kind of appreciated that this whole content.
Sorry.
The context. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. This came up kind of in the context of comprehension being the goal, and I thought that was fascinating. And then also, something I liked about this chapter, even though it could be hard to get through with, was obviously I learned a lot from the research, but there was a few things that I thought, oh, I'm doing that, but that's why I'm doing it. I kind of forgot. So in this point of like the allocating resources, I was thinking, well, I use repetitive texts all the time, and I know that's important, but this was kind of nice. It's like, oh yeah, that's why I'm doing that. Because like they mentioned, the repetitive text that can help with this.
Yeah.
And also for me, it was the reminder of like how much is going into these kids' heads, because I think, not even meaning to, as fluent readers, we don't even stop a minute because things are so busy to realize that huge process that it takes to be able to get there. And that was a good reminder for me in this.
And I think
that relates to what I was thinking too. This is Linda Schlief, and where it says they're devoting those resources, that also takes more time, and that relates to fluency. And there's a definite relationship between fluency and comprehension, as Susanna just mentioned. So I think that's interesting too.
And in the chat, Lisa's saying, you know, it's the same for all readers. It brings home our kids will have the same struggles. Word identification takes cognitive resources, just like letters, just like everything takes its resources. And I think it's just good to be aware of it. Well, there's two other contrasts that she mentions in this. And again, they. Language comprehension is the knowledge of the world and the knowledge of text structure. So then it's like, on the other hand, without experience and familiarity with a variety of texts, and frankly, with a variety of worldly situations, readers or listeners may be unable to process written language. So if your world is really small and your experiences have been limited due to medical fragility, for example, some of that stuff is really hard to pull comprehension towards. And I have been thoughtful about that as I've been picking books for older kids. And by older, I mean out of that early literacy time frame that's typical between 3 and 5, and saying, okay, now I have a 7 or 8-year-old and I want to use a chapter book, but I'm going to do a Junie B. Jones book because I know they know about school. I think it's super fun when they get to a point where you can do a Harry Potter and they have enough life experience where they can imagine things. But I think it's important to realize that language comprehension has to do with, I don't know anything about this, but it's kind of like that. And so they have to have enough life experience sometimes to help them with comprehension.
There's a question in the chat. Would you recommend introducing sight words before a student has letters and sounds?
I definitely have an answer on that, but I wonder if other people have answers
One thing
to that.
In reading I don't have a definite either, but in reading either this chapter or the next chapter, I can't remember, was talking about that there isn't that prerequisite pattern that sometimes we've seen, like first they do this and then they need to do this, that you can learn things at different skills at the same time or intermixing. But
For
does
me,
anybody have
I end up doing both at the same time, and sometimes I do family members. So I'll do like the kid's name, the mom, the sight word mom, the sight word dad, and then I'll do the letter of the first name, the letter of M, and the letter of D. And so they can kind of see that you could, maybe they're doing eye gaze, or maybe they're doing alternate axis of some kind. But I'm saying you could ask for mom or dad by looking at the word, or you could by doing it by the letter. They all have meaning. I don't know if others have input for that question as well, as far as sight words and letters and sounds and sequence. But I feel like they're pretty clear about there isn't a right answer on this one.
when you think about students too, they have pockets of learning, right? So especially as kids get older, like I'm sure we know kids who have some sight words, word recognition, but not all letters and sounds or something like that. So.
And then the other contrast was whole text print processing is everything that silent reading with comprehension requires beyond the one-word identification of language comprehension. And then they list all these things: inner speech use, projecting prosody, making print to meaning links, eye movements in reading, the integration of the 4 components all at once. And it just, I don't know, I think it highlights that how amazing it is that any of us can read. So I think they say, yeah, we can have this great little definition, but what is it actually? It's a lot. It's a lot for our kids. So what is comprehensive literacy instruction? So I had bullets and then I numbered, and I don't mean to number this because there is a sequence. So that's where I'm at there. But so they listed, I think it's 5 things in literacy instruction, and 5 things that's involved in instruction. And this is, you have to order them, but it's not it's not in sequence in that sense. So literacy specific elements, which are phonological awareness, phonics, vocabulary, reading fluency, reading comprehension, and writing. So part of you is thinking, what else is there? How is there 5 other things? But it says those things and the type of instruction. The type of instruction is age appropriate. And again, I think we get stuck in brown bear way too long for some of our older kids. And we don't even know if we're measuring boredom or if we're measuring literacy if we stick with some of these younger books. Explicit, systematic, developmentally appropriate, and incorporating principles of universal design. And then this is where some people say, well, I quit. I don't know how to do that. And trust me, the next chapters breaks down each element and talks about these exact things. So that's exciting. I'm just going to work through these 5 and then we'll talk about chat. Types of materials: diverse, high quality, print materials, reflecting the students' developmental levels and interests. And this is where I think that we as therapists could come in with like, oh my gosh, I have this new tool, which is a type of material. But there has to be all this other explanation of the literacy elements and buy-in from the instructional team that you even need this material. So I think we're all drawn to either theory or instruction, or let's jump right into the technology or the materials. And we're drawn to some of these and maybe don't always equally weight the rest of it, especially when you're working with others who may bring a different influence. Somebody else is really thinks more about type of instruction, or they're really wanting that variety of literacy specific elements, and so the materials isn't their home base. Applications of literacy: reading, writing across content areas, engaging in self-directed learning, navigating, understanding complex print and digital subject matter. This is where I feel like we do sometimes wait until there's sight words and there's letter understanding and there's all these other things in place. And they're saying, no, we're actually going to have a little bit of that all the time. Type of assessment. And this is where things get tricky. I think we can over assess. I think that some people are always assessing and not as much teaching is actually happening. And they even quoted that in the book that when you change the alternative access methods, that we pretty much instantly shift into assessment mode because there's a right and wrong answer. So making sure that there's age-appropriate assessments, screenings, diagnostics, formative, summative, and progress monitoring without that being the only focus. And again, I think some are drawn to that and some are allergic to that. So we'll figure out which ones we are. Teacher lesson planning, collaborative and planning, continuous professional learning. And that is something that really has to happen almost at the district level, is figuring out how do teachers and paras have time to plan next week's information, and how do we have time as a team to talk about all this. And what then do the IEP goals look like to line up with your plan, to line up with assessment, but not take over? So those were the 6 elements of instruction.
Brenda, the last one, teacher lesson planning, reminds me of last week, I think, was it, when we were talking about writing, and someone was mentioning, pairing with different disciplines to come up with those lesson plans and IEP goals, so that they're more cohesive. And also thinking about, inclusion and how that all plays into that.
Yeah. And the type of instruction is that universal design inclusion stuff, and that requires significant planning with general ed teachers, probably. So I don't know about you guys. I don't know how you felt when you read all these things. I don't think any of us are gonna disagree that these aren't required elements of instruction. But I think this leads to a realization of how, in fact, collaborative this comprehensive literacy instruction is required to be, and thus, when in the private Facebook page book study became, a pretty big discussion about barriers of collaboration within teams. So here's what I think.
And
Yes,
can I
Linda.
say something about that? So
Yeah.
I was thinking that what you just went through, those 12 items or whatever, those multiple features, that was the federal government's definition of comprehensive literacy instruction. And then the authors took that and simplified it into those 4 areas. And I really appreciated that because it made it seem less complex. Do you know what I mean?
So yes, and so that's what I was just about to dive into. So you're
Oh,
right.
okay.
So we have, well, let me show you. We have reading, and then we have self-directed learning, word study, and writing.
Right.
So let me dive into that and see
Right.
if people are less stressed out or more stressed out. So this was also from Erin Warren, and I did email her and ask for permission to use all her graphics. I'm sure she's so great. So the reading comprehension, they've simplified and said, okay, it's anchor, read, and apply. So build background knowledge and set a purpose, listen for reading and listening time, and do something tied to the purpose. So they've kind of said, maybe we figure out how to anchor, read, and apply, and that covers all of the reading part. So I just like that. Sorry, guys. If I move my mouse at all, it's flipping through, and I'm really sorry. The literacy instruction continued to these other 3. Self-directed learning. It is essential that students with significant disabilities have daily opportunities for self-directed reading. And I think that becomes quickly a materials issue. How do we have access to self-directed reading for kids with a variety of interests and a variety of access and a variety of alertness? So the variety piece means that the library needs to be extensive, and that's where some of our Tar Heel Reader and online and digital stuff becomes more realistic than actual books. What did you guys think about this self-directed reading?
I think we might be better at that than the self-directed writing. I mean, better at letting kids do it than the self-directed writing. But, for me, the self-directed reading goes back to the having multi-level, age-appropriate, multi-age appropriate materials available in all different genres. And I appreciated where they said, this means no intervention from the teacher, that you shouldn't make a list that they have to choose from, or, stuff like that. So those were good reminders.
Yeah, but then I also feel like, and I don't mean to be a naysayer, but I also feel like, sometimes we have kids with just yes and no, and it's like, I'm going to have to throw out some ideas, and you're going to tell me yes or no, and you have the right to tell me no, but we are always going to be somewhat limited to those who are unable to really communicate exactly what kind of book they want to read, as well as that they don't always know what their options are. So I think there has to be some direction initially on just what's available. So I know that some of that has to do with explaining maybe genres and things like that, where we think that kids aren't really ready for that type of vocabulary, and that's again where I think we can sell kids short. I don't know how you guys feel about, if you're not supposed to have a list, then how are we getting there?
But Brenda, I think it's an attitude though. I think it's you can direct it first. I think you have to. We have to teach our kids most everything. Just like core words don't come automatically, teaching them that they have, but it's an attitude that there's time for them to have their own choices. There's time to, because I see in so many classrooms, and I'm not saying that they're bad classrooms, because I don't mean it that way, but that this is the book of the week and this is the topic that we're going to provide, and that's what's available. But if there's self-directed reading time, I don't want to read about brown bear. I want to read about dinosaurs, you know? And I think it's almost more of an awareness than it is, you have to have self-directed, you know.
You know what? I think that's a really good way to think about it. I love it. And I also think it's a less threatening way to talk to a team who may be resistant. And we're going to talk about that in our Zoom as well, and that's coming up next, is coming at it from an angle of what are teams already doing successfully, and that we might just be naming it differently now, so that we have a more comprehensive, for lack of a better word, no pun intended, scope, and just that attitude comes out from understanding what are we already doing now. And Sari mentioned this earlier, and that's why we're doing it, and then keeping the intent behind the activity.
There are a lot of really great comments about this self-directed reading. And so I think we all understand how important it is, and that it's a challenge, but it's important. And just that it might be picking up a book or finding something. And it reminds me too that it can be not a book. It could be, someone might be interested in looking at a map or the menu or something like that too, that we just let them explore. But I'm loving the comments.
Yeah, I'm seeing this too. This is good. The next one was word study, and that was build on what students know in order to expand their ability to read and spell words effortlessly as possible. And this is where I think that science and the language of math and any history units and things can be part of their literacy instruction and not separate from. And it helps make all these a daily opportunity if content, build on what students know. If content being taught is now part of their literacy instruction, and it's not. And I think a lot of teachers have gone this route where they're doing a science experiment. We're taking those words. We're finding the core words in science. We're finding the, they're doing the word wall with that cooking experiment. Right? This doesn't have to be all different separate things. In fact, it shouldn't be. And so building on what students know and in order to expand means that you might have to create some experiences in your classroom so that that they know them and you can build on that. I'm sure we're all seeing some of that in classrooms, and some teachers are so natural at it and others are so structured that it doesn't flow quite the same way. But I think that the intent is there in most classrooms.
At our district, we have literacy through those the science and social studies. So actually I'm moving up to 6th grade, and I'm not a social studies teacher. I'm a literacy through social studies. So the basis is literacy, but it's focusing on social studies concepts and bringing that. But again, those areas of literacy. So it'll be exciting and this year I teach 5th grade. And again, our ELA time is social studies or science based But again, it's those strategies that we're using to tackle those textbooks or whatever.
And I think just that verbiage alone, right? Okay, so literacy through science, what does that look like? Literacy through social studies, what does that look like? And it's just switching a few words around, but it kind of makes the frame of mind, brings a purpose and intent forward.
Yeah. Well, and I didn't know that 6th grade through 12th grade has literacy standards for social studies, science, technology, because I've only worked in K-5. So now that there's this whole different set, but actually comparing them, they're just the same thing, only their focus is on that content area. So that's pretty cool.
It is cool. And isn't it funny how you come all the way full circle and you're like, oh, well, now all those things make sense. Okay, so writing is writing, the heart of experience is daily experience in writing to communicate one's thoughts. And I think that Linda hit it on the head. Am I muted? I can't figure myself. Oh.
We can hear you,
can't-
Brenda.
You can't mute
now you're muted.
yourself. We can't hear you. And we can't hear you.
You
You can't mute yourself.
How about now? Can you hear me
Yeah.
now? Okay.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. All of a sudden it said you are muted on my screen, so I'm sorry. So daily experiences to write, and this is where everyone goes, wait, what, how? And I think that a lot of us feel like, you know, when in the very beginning, we were like, what do we feel comfortable with? Where do we have a lot to learn? And what feels overwhelming? And the writing process definitely felt like that feels sequential. It feels like we're not writing until later. And I think that's where those alternative pencils, and Heidi Brislin had a lot to say about that, and things help us remember, what does writing look like in those early phases? So the daily writing without a lot of correction is something that I don't think we see in classrooms regularly now. Do you?
Sometimes I think people do it as journal writing. You know, kids have a daily time when they write in their journal.
Yeah.
I think maybe sometimes a lot of us don't know, like looking at a kid with complicated issues, okay, and writing so much means the standard traditional writing, and to jump out of that for some people is hard, but when you start jumping out of it, it's fun.
I think that I think it takes a lot of time. I think it takes a lot of time to get every child, and with every different ability, to experience writing. And we often don't create the time in the schedule for it.
I have a question. Because I'm teach gen ed. My son has ADHD. So he does a lot of the talk, text, speech to text. Is that considered writing as we're discussing it here? Or is it more actual physical, like typing or pencil writing? Or the other thing is, I had a student come this year. He had very limited school. He was from Mexico, and he's visually impaired. So he doesn't know how to Braille yet. So like he's learning to the English language and the Brailler and all of these things. So like we had where his para would translate his writing, But again, it's what are some things that to focus on these examples in writing.
Should I answer that? This is Rose Roscoe. I forgot to change my name here. I'm Sue Wright on this slide, but I do a lot of assistive technology with older kids, and absolutely speech to text, any way that your student is expressing ideas. If you think about universal design for learning, there's multiple options for self-expression. So I think that's the key. I mean, someone said earlier, Linda, I think, you know, oh yeah, teachers get out a journal and they lay a blank journal with a pen or a crayon in front of a kid, and that's the writing opportunity. But there are so many different ways to express ideas. So I think writing isn't the act physically necessarily of writing or typing. It's getting your ideas out in some expression that you can publish or share, whatever that is. That's my opinion and my experience. So I think you're on the right track, and absolutely your student is writing.
And Rose, I think I'd contribute that older model of segregating writing separate from spoken language, separate from reading, separate from vocabulary development is not as helpful as one where all the disciplines contribute and it's fluid between those ideas.
Yeah, I think I wrote in an earlier post too that this is just such a great opportunity to collaborate and have the OTs and SLPs supporting writing in this way in the classroom is what we're all about. It shouldn't, you know, we're past pulling kids out and working on splinter skills. So how can we take those kids that don't have much of a writing opportunity and help that teacher create writing opportunities using a variety of low tech to high tech options and tools. So absolutely.
So I also think that one of the reasons why I do not display pictures in the message window in AAC is because I want to see their words turn into text only. And I think anything they generate on AAC and see in that message window is also writing. And especially when you, maybe the next step is to enable that share piece so that all those words in the message window then get email, text, sent in some way so that it can be printed in a different way or displayed in a different way. But that's where communication and writing are kind of happening simultaneously. So, and I think, again, separating those is a disservice.
Well, and I appreciated what Rose said about thinking about self-expression instead of just writing per se, so that there are lots of ways for kids to show what they know or what they're thinking. So I think that really, that certainly equates to universal design for learning too, right?
Yeah, so I feel like writing is anytime we're using words, written words, to communicate ideas. And sometimes it's a written letter. And sometimes that means you're eye gazing at one letter, or you're using a braille or whatever, but you're using words to communicate ideas, and it doesn't have to be without audio for it to be writing. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna break up into groups, and we're gonna talk about these two things. We're gonna talk about the barriers to influencing change towards this model of literacy instruction, and what you feel like your role is in eliciting that change. This is also an opportunity, since these will be small groups, it'll be an opportunity for you to, I'm sorry if you guys can see all this stuff. I'm trying to move it. Can you see my chat and everything in front of this?
No.
Okay. I'm going to break you guys up into groups pretty randomly, and there is no leader in this group, and there is no Google Doc to write your ideas. This is just for you guys. These are your questions. What are the barriers to influencing change? What is your role in doing that? And maybe just think about how you're going to bite this off. I'm going to see if I can. Okay. So I think you guys, I'm nervous now. I don't have any controls, which is very bizarre.
Brenda, do you want me to? You can't make me host it.
I think I want to stop share, and then I have my controls. There we go. Okay, bigger room. Okay, so there we go. You guys should all be invited into rooms.
I'm not seeing it yet, Brenda.
Welcome back. I'm interested to find out what you guys thought about those smaller groups. I know it does kind of feel like forced participation, which is not necessarily our goal, but there was feedback that maybe the big rooms were too big. Everyone wasn't heard, and then others, as soon as they get in a small room like that, they're like, hold on, I didn't sign up for this. In fact, I forgot to read this week, and I don't know what I'm going to say. So I don't know how your groups went, but if you want to just shoot in the chat, if you like the big groups or the small groups, then let me know. So we can do this any which way that works best for the group. And, for those of you who really do like the small groups, we will do a few of them, and the rest of us, will be okay. But I hope you guys had some good discussions and didn't feel like you had to, you didn't feel like you had to say stuff if you didn't want to, but we really felt like, since today was about kind of talking about barriers and roles and people maybe wanting to say, I have a really tough team and does anyone have advice? We thought people might want to talk about those vulnerable situations in smaller groups. So that's—
Well, Brenda, I'm just noticing when we got back, I saw so many more faces. So, because, I think a lot of us turned our video on once we got into that small group. So I think that's a sign that it was a good way to connect.
So I know one group had just everybody bailed. So I guess that didn't work out that well. But the rest of you were fine. We're all, at least you're all still here. So anyways, we did what we did. Does anyone want to share anything about what came out, or what you learned, or any really, excellent ideas that somebody said in your group? I'm going to start here, or here's how I'm going to talk about this. Anything just that you feel like the whole group should hear?
Yeah, one thing came up in our group that was about how, for kids who aren't able to read, are just emerging readers, and maybe have physical disabilities, that maybe they can't hold a book or pick a book like we were talking about to practice reading, is looking at different ways of practicing reading instead of books, like even get video games or apps that have some text, or using closed captioning for reading as you're watching something. So kind of like we talked about with writing, looking at alternative ways to independently read or to independently write.
Sure.
We had someone in my group that shared some fun game, sort of like play-based writing things that they've done. So they had like the student pick whether or not they want to be a police officer or a doctor or a restaurant person, and then they were writing like a ticket for someone. So they talked about what was the ticket for, and those sorts of things, or writing down someone's symptoms if they're playing doctor. And I thought those were really cute, creative ways to incorporate writing into playtime.
I do something where we tell a group story. And so it's like, once upon a time there was and somebody's going to pick from their who page, or their people page, or their animal page, right? Anything can be the main character. And then, is it a boy or a girl? And then we move to the next person. And when was it? Was it daytime or nighttime? Maybe we have daytime and nighttime as sight words. Maybe we have D and N, and maybe we have AAC devices. I mean, it doesn't have to be a Thursday, or it doesn't have to be August, or a windy winter day. It can be whenever, when whatever way they write, when. And then the next thing is, and where were they? And for all of you with devices, you can go to places and for all, right? But, and this might just be happening with Sharpie and a pen on the background, or if you're a smart boarder, they're just seeing, they're telling a group story. Once upon a time, there was a boy, and you know, you can get down to what was his name, and you know, to show 2 letters, and we all guess names that start with that letter. I mean, it can go on and on. And but then you're kind of pulling that together. Well, for me as an SLP, I'm pulling together components of a narrative and meeting my little goal. But for the class, for the small group, or however you're doing it, they're all participating in a writing experience in whatever way that they can do that. And it builds this typically a very silly story. And that's super fun. And there's no wrong answers. And writing is fun. And then we end up with this book. When I do private therapy, I have a book of kids' silly stories. And sometimes a little bit of truth comes out in that too. You know, sometimes somebody says something that happened and you kind of wonder if that happened at your house, because I know you and I know what you just said, and I'm pretty sure that happens. Anyways, that's one thing I do with writing is make it errorless and have whatever form of communication turn into written words right on the story. So it kind of makes it, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's group directed rather than self-directed, but that may be what we have time for, or that may be your adult to student relationship in that moment. Okay, it's 1 o'clock. You guys all made it to Friday at 1 o'clock. I'm just saying, that's its own little, you know, reward right there. Thank you guys so much for being here. We are into next week, no matter what happens. We are reading the next week. And what we're doing is just, the only really homework is that we're going to keep adding to the ad libs as we dive in from here forward. It's a lot of strategies and a lot of fun ideas. And so we're hoping that whatever idea just kind of lands, you make a book snap on it. And so that at the end, we're hoping that this becomes just the great slideshow for you and everyone else of, oh yeah, as we all fade into summer and forget everything we learned and come back and are so glad that we brainstorm these book snaps all during the study. And we also get to see what other people, what else landed to others as well. So we're hoping the book snaps serve as some almost planning for you in the fall as you reflect back. So think about that when you're doing a book snap this week, about what, if I'm going to do one thing from this chapter, what's it going to be? And slap that idea on a book snap so that everybody gets to remember ideas when it needs to be fresh. Does that sound good? All right. Thank you guys all for coming, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
I feel horrible. I got a text that I was supposed to promote Kristen to a co-host. She wasn't even on my list. I saw her face at one point. Then I went to go promote her and couldn't, and I don't know if she even made it. I'm not sure. You're muted, I think.
Okay, sorry, I was just getting people off. No, she was on, and then she said, she texted Linda and me, she said she lost